Okay, everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss all the remaining topics that is in French Revolution, and this is our third part video, and we are going to discuss the thing that women have participated in almost every revolt that happened in 1789 time period. But did actually women got the revolution? And we are going to discuss all the thing about this topic. So first point here is expecting for the changes after revolution, but they were unsatisfied. Women also had participated in the process of revolt. They have participated in revolution process. They had some expectation from the results because the government now had been changed from monarch to constitutional monarch, but they were not satisfied with the result. Why? Because most of the women did not have access to the education. We are talking about before the time period of 1789, and some of the women that belongs to noble's family, or the whether they were the richer section, they belonged from the richer section of the society. They only got right to education or access to education, we could say. Not the all women that live in France in at 1789 time period, they don't have access to the education. And every woman that lives in France has to do all the household work, like they have to cook food, they have to look after the children, they have to look after the family members, all the things. Now what happened when the government was changed, but the result was not as good for women as they wanted? So they started organizing some political clubs like Jacobins have done, but there were some important groups like the Society of Republican Women who were raising the voices of women at that particular time. And the main demands of women were they wanted to be equal politically to the men, and that's why they demanded that the right to vote should also be given to the women, and second, they should be elected to the assembly and hold the political office. Women also should get elected for the assemblies, for the legislative assembly that were there, and they should have some positions at the highest political offices. Now, so revolutionary government have done some work. Revolutionary government means after the when King Louis XVI was dethroned, and what the government was made after that, that is known as revolutionary government. They created some state school for the women, and schooling was made compulsory for all the girls, that all the girls has to do the schooling. Now the divorce was legal, and women's father could not be able to force them into marriage against their will. If the women don't want to get married with the man, or at that age, the father cannot force them, and this was the kind of right they have entitled to the women. Now onwards, women could now train for the job, could become artists or run small businesses. Okay, so these were kind of results that got the woman some kind of right. Now last point here is women revolution was continued in the reign of terror, and most of the women's club were banned, and some of the prominent ladies were killed. As like there was Olympe de Gouges, who was executed at that particular time. We all know that Robespierre was a kind of leader that doesn't want to hear any other voices. Whatever he was doing, he thinks that he is doing it right, and that is why he banned so many political clubs in which there were some women political club also, and some women were arrested and later they were executed. And it was the finally 1946 when the women of France won the right to vote. Okay, so finally the French women got right to vote or equality in perspective of political. They got right to vote in 1946. Now if we talk about the abolition of slavery, we all know that slavery is a kind of thing which is unacceptable, unethical, and this shouldn't be done. So, one of the most revolutionary social reform of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. So, one of the best thing that uh, Jacobin regime has given, that was they have abolished slavery from all the French colonies, from all the French occupied areas. They just abolished slavery and they give freedom to those people who were slaves. And that is the best thing that the regime of Jacobin could do. And now here I would tell you how the slave trade war was happening between three continents. If you see here, there is Europe. What happens from here? The Europeans took or manufactured goods, and they took all the manufacturing goods to the all the way Africa. They sell all the manufactured goods to the Africa, and in return they just purchase some slave from the traders, and they took these slaves to the North America. Okay, they took these slaves to the North America where there were a area where Europeans were doing the plantation of tea and other important crops, as like cotton was there. Okay, and cotton and tea was used as raw material, or indigo was there as that was used as raw material. So slaves were taken from Africa and they were departed at the Northern America. Now they exchange slaves and they purchase raw material from the slaves, and then they came back to their country, to the Europe, with some raw material. And this is a kind of triangular trade that was occurring at that particular time. Okay, so this is how the traders of France, not only the France but European traders, got so much of profit, so that they emerge as a new middle class. Okay, now the next point of it is the convention in which in 1794 legislated to free all the slaves in French overseas possession. And after the regime of Jacobins, the convention was there, and it decided that in 1794 all the slaves will become free from French overseas possession. But this was for a very short term measure, because in 1804 Napoleon assassinated the throne of France and he reintroduced the slavery. Okay, but now after this happened in the reign of Napoleon, the slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in year 1848. Okay, now the next part of our chapter is revolution in everyday life. What was happening here? So, when the people of France demolished the palace of Bastille, what was happened there? King just removed, King just abolished the censorship after the demolition of Bastille. When the censorship abolished, every person, every French people now onwards can criticize the king, or now onwards they can express their views, what they think about any kind of topic. And in this process, lots of news articles were written, lots of uh, arts were made in which the people were connecting each other. And now the Declaration of Right of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. All of you know that when France became constitutional monarch, there were some certain uh, laws, there were some certain rights that have been given to the man, and into this, the freedom of speech and expression was considered as a natural right, that it cannot be snatched from the people of France at any cost, because they were writing some pamphlets, they were writing some journals, they were writing some news articles, and by this they were discussing all the things that were occurring at that particular time in France. Newspaper, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded the towns of France from where they traveled rapidly into the countryside. All the things that have something, some knowledge into it, some news into it, some information into it. Firstly, they were spread all around the towns of France, but after some time, they rapidly went up to the countryside, and every places of France were discussing all the burning topics of that time. And that is what in this chapter happened. Now, the last some point was that Napoleon Bonaparte took over the France in 1804. Okay, and after his reign was ended in 1814. Before his reign was ended, he won so many states of Europe that it created a major problem for majority of the countries that were in Europe, and they fought united against the France, as like Austria, Russia, Britain, and Prussia. These were some countries who who were united to defeat the France, and in finally in 1814 the Napoleon was defeated. Okay, so that is what the French Revolution is all about. That is it for today. We will meet in our next video.